So hi, Deborah. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's so nice for me to start the day talking about photography because you do it every day, but I, as a photographer, not necessarily. So, there are days where I don't think about it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's always in the back of my mind.
Sure.
But
I imagine it's a running commentary.
yeah, but I don't necessarily engage in it.
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily around people who are involved
Okay.
in photography.
Got it.
So tell me something, Swann Galleries, you position yourselves as specialist auctioneers of works on paper. That's very specific.
Yeah, well, Swann originated as a rare book house and then expanded beyond, and we continue to expand. But yes, we are a works on paper house, including photography. There are some departments where that's actually the work offered is actually a bit broader than that, but we are a specialty auction house.
Yeah, I mean, you are the head of the photography department, which auctions photography in various forms and incarnations.
Yes.
But right, but when it held its first photographic auction 70 years ago, vernacular photography, which is important today, was not part of it yet.
Well, not officially, although I would say, if you look through that first catalog, there are many things there that we might consider vernacular photography today. I mean, I think that term and the notion of studying or talking about or explicitly discussing what that means is rather new, but as a collecting area, it's not at all new. The people who were initially selling photographs were selling albums, single images. Early collectors were collecting all kinds of things that had images and photographs, not just what we think of today as fine art photography. So I think the name is new. The idea of offering it as a section or a category exactly is new, but the actual notion is very old. The impulse collect in that way.
Can you define this category now that it's official and it has collectors that specialize in it, it has museums for it and so on? Can you define it for us in its official designation, let's say?
Sure. Well, the term vernacular photography really applies. I don't really like to define it in this way, but I think it makes the most sense to say it's things that are not fine art photography. So I don't like to define it as things that it's not, but it's a way to begin to think about it. It's photography as it's used, applied, considered by people who are not using it to create fine art material. So it applies to things like snapshots. It applies to some photojournalism, to documentary work, to scientists who are using the camera. It's the broad umbrella of photography in all of its applications and uses beyond fine art.
But collectors do specialize in different kinds of vernacular.
Absolutely.
Mug shots, graduation shots, weddings, dead people, dogs, criminals, garden parties, whatnot. They specialize.
There's something for everybody. That's the best thing about it.
So in the end, what makes a vernacular print collectible, and in the end, for you, how do you price them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun because I think when it comes to vernacular photography, it's all about the sense of discovery. I think this is what people love about it, is that it's very often a unique item. And so there is this sense of discovering something new and exciting when you acquire a vernacular item, a snapshot, anything. Pricing it can be more challenging, which also makes it a little bit more fun. You know, I've priced many Cartier-Bresson photographs in my career, and I know how to do that. It's not that difficult unless the print is exceedingly rare. But when it comes to, you know, a mugshot album, or you know, I've sold some really beautiful cyanotype albums, or an object with photographs on it. The challenge is really laid out. You know, what can you compare it to? What is the image? What is the content of the image? Do I think that there are collectors for that type of image? I mean, those are the kind of questions that we begin to ask, and it can lead to really interesting research and to interesting discussion about the value.
But there must be a list of set attributes that contribute to pricing or placing value on something. So the more attributes they line up,
sure,
and the more value increases on the
sure.
value.
Well, you know, obviously, as with anything else, condition is a major factor.
Yes,
I think as we've offered this material at auction, you see over time, from sale to sale, certain patterns in terms of what people seem to be collecting, where the competitive bidding really lands. And that every time, every sale, that gives us a new new information to move forward. So yeah, I mean, there are things that we look for, but really what I'm looking for more than anything is something fresh, visually impactful, in good condition, that I think really adds something visually, historically to the sale.
But in the end, it's always priced to sell. Am I correct?
Well, it's priced, the pricing for these vernacular pieces, it's not a science, but it is not without thought in terms of where we've sold things we might consider comparables before. But the pricing for a lot of this material is what we might call like accessible for an entry point collector. You know, it's another thing that I like about it is that for a new collector, this is a place where you can acquire really interesting, great things for, you know, not a lot of money. It's a good place to start.
Yeah, they're really stunning pieces.
Yes.
In the macro photography, and
it helps
also
train your eye. Yeah.
And also in the hands of a talented collector, when you put them together, they really add value to one another. It becomes something else.
Absolutely, we can, you know, there are collectors who have put together really interesting things where you're right, the whole is an item in and of itself. Yeah, where there's a theme or an idea that runs through the collection.
So you were not there in 1941 when Swann started 15 years ago. Not sure why. But you were there. But you were there in 2006 and 2014 for the first sales of photo books in the macro photography. Did these auctions attract a larger than usual crowd because they were the first in their type?
Yeah, those sales were extremely exciting to be a part of. You know, the 2006 was really when I started. I mean, I started at Swann in 2005, but I began working with Dale in 2006 and full time. And I was overwhelmed by the enthusiasm of the people collecting photo books at that time. You know, the volume. I learned so much in such a short period of time. It was really a wonderful time to begin. And then similarly for the vernacular sale, you know, we'd been offering that material before that, but this was the first time that we put together a section of a catalog and gave it a title and marketed the material in that category. And that was also extremely exciting. I just recall both with buyers, collectors, consigners, between the members of the department, just really exciting discussions about what a photograph is and what it means to collect photography.
That must
And
be
I
exciting.
just can't eat, sorry.
Must have been very exciting.
It was just thrilling to have those conversations. And, that's something that I love about Swann. I love about the field. I love that we are part of a relatively young market. So these conversations remain very important. And yeah, it was really a special experience.
How come it took so long to auction photo books? You'd think that it would have started 50 years earlier, because the books with images, that's not unusual. And surely they were already selling them in bookstores along the Seine in Paris for a while, and old postcards as well. So how do you explain it took so long for photo books to come to the fore in terms of a special category?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, that's not the first year that photo books appeared at all in a sale. This is just when the sales begin to be named and sort of framed in a new way. And, photograph sales auctions have been happening consistently for decades before that. I just think it took time for these frames to be established. I think books were being sold and traded. They're a foundational element of the medium. So I think there was certainly an awareness of that long before, and a discussion about that. But, when you think about how young these sales really are and how much growth was happening all at the same time, it's really not that surprising. I mean, it's the market for prints and paintings is centuries old. The market at auction for photographs is, we had the first sale, in 1952, but the sales, it was a big break after that. The sales didn't really start being, consistent until the 80s. And even then they were offering photographs with prints. So, and maps, at least at Swann. So it's really, it's not that long of a time that it took for that section to be sort of framed out on its own.
Yeah, I remember there weren't that many photo galleries when I came to New York, when I came to the United States.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there were, those early galleries, you can really count them, on one hand almost. And, it all happened very explosively, at a certain time. But it did take time.
What's interesting is how many important gallerists came out of these few galleries, where they learned their trade there, and then in turn, trained and mentored other galleries who are important today in the marketplace.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
So those early figures are very strong, and it's not, they were pioneers, so it's not surprising, but a strong viewpoint on how photography should be sold or could be sold. And absolutely, their legacy is still present today.
So Deborah, you came out of Smith College and you landed at Swann. How long has it been? How has it been for you?
Well, I graduated from Smith in 2005 and almost immediately began working at Swann. I began working at the front desk and floating to different departments, and soon after began working with Dale, and I feel incredibly lucky to have had that trajectory. I was recommended to Swann from the curator of rare books at Smith, who thought, who knew I wanted a hands-on learning experience, and told me auction houses are the way to do that. And he was absolutely right. So I thought, oh, I will go to Swann for a couple years, then I'll do something else. Clearly, I had it all wrong in my mind, but luckily, I feel lucky. You know, Dale, again, it's just, what is it? Luck. I think of it as sort of meant to be, you know, that I ended up working with her. She was an incredible mentor to me. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What is it that she taught you that shaped your present course, let's say, that stayed
Well,
with you?
you know, Dale is always thinking about new ways to talk about photography and new ways to sell it. And she never wanted to have a sale that looked like the sale we had just before it. You know, she wanted to broaden the notion of what photography can do and what it is and what it means to collect photography. You know, the photo market was really, in a lot of ways, was based on the print and drawings market, but it's a different medium. You know, it means different things. It does different things in our world. It's used in different ways. And, you know, I will always think of photography in that same way, as this democratic medium that offers us many possibilities. And as a specialist in that medium, I feel that it's my job to educate and talk about that and work hard to expand what it means to sell and collect. And that's Dale. I mean, that's what she taught me, or one of the things that she taught me. And I think about it all the time.
That's important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we all want, you know, an Ansel Adams moonrise in our sale. We all want, you know, iconic images that people know and love and care about. But I also think it's my job to bring new material to the sales.
To keep it young and dynamic, moving
Yes,
forward.
exactly. Yes.
Dale is an auctioneer, isn't she?
She did auctioneer. Yes.
And how does it bear on the job to be or not to be an auctioneer? And how does one become an auctioneer? Is that an appealing activity for you?
Is it what activity? I'm sorry.
An appealing.
Oh, you know, I think of the good auctioneers I've seen do their jobs. It's a performative you know, role. It's an important, obviously, you know, calling a sale is you know, skillfully is a rare thing to be able to do. You know, it's not something I do. I really like the behind the scenes work during a sale, you know, working with bidders on the phone. I like all the lead up to a sale, working with potential bidders and collectors, institutions who are considering the work and finding ways to facilitate that. I mean, it's possible that I'll become an auctioneer at some point. I think it's something that takes a long time.
That's like the adrenaline.
A lot of adrenaline, for sure. Yeah. I think it's changed a lot with, I mean, I say this as someone who doesn't sit on the podium, but especially COVID has accelerated this transition towards bidding online. And a lot of people bid on our app and on other internet platforms during the sale. And I think that really changes an auctioneer's approach, because these are people who we don't even know during the sale where they are, who they are, you know. And I think that really, you know, you're performing for an internet audience in a way that's you know, it's different.
Is it important for you to have a relationship with auctioneers as part of your job?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's important that you trust the auctioneer. And I obviously, you know, there are a few different auctioneers at Swann, and they all have a different style, but I trust them and admire the work that they do. So yeah, I think, yes, absolutely.
But you must engage in a lot of research in your work. Where did that love for research come from? Because you must do a lot of it.
Yeah, well, pricing research is one thing, and then there's the background research we might do to give context and important information about a work that we're selling, or in the case of a vernacular item, like a historical context to what the piece is. And I love that. I mean, I think for me, that comes from a love of reading. And that's in addition to art, that was my other great love as a student, was just reading. You know, I love to read. And I think, you know,
And
getting
possibly curiosity as well.
it's curiosity. It's just the experience of like learning something new, right? It's just exciting and fun. You know, I wish I had more time to do research. I think that's I have a team, I have staff at Swann, and you know, I think the move towards leadership means the research is largely handled by my team, who I trust, you know, explicitly, and I do as much as I can as well. So yeah, it's great.
On the other hand, there must be a lot of unpredictability in your work, in your occupation, right?
A lot of instability.
Unpredictability.
Oh, absolutely, yes. And that is for me too something that I love. You know,
You enjoy that.
yes. I mean, on the one hand, are the auction. I think anyone who works in auctions knows that the schedule, the deadlines are very consistent. It's just like a cycle of sale dates, deadlines. You go through these different stages. But the day to day, there's an immense amount of unpredictability. And I love that. You know, you start the day, I always say I start the day with a to-do list. And then by the end of the day, I've probably done none of that list, but I've done many other things that are really exciting and unexpected.
But it's important to have the list.
Right.
Nevertheless.
I need the list, and eventually it gets done. But yeah, I mean, you don't know who's going to call or come in or send you an email, or, you know, what you're going to need to look at. And that's extremely exciting for me.
But you know, how about deadlines and stuff? I imagine you cannot postpone auctions, so there must be
Oh,
a lot
no.
of pressure.
Well, that's why I say the list gets done. I mean, we have a deadline, and we have to get a sale out by a certain time, and it always happens. You know, when
Yeah.
I talk to Dale, you know, coming up, training new staff, you know, you always like, it seems impossible at a certain point every single time. And yet every single time we do it. So yeah.
But you must have a lot of balls in the air, especially with thematic auctions where you have to get a lot of pieces from different places all at the same time at the same place. Do you develop strategies for that? You have a strategy after a while?
Yeah.
Happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to be able to multitask to do a job like this, and keep a lot of balls in there, keep a lot of tasks in your head at once, which I kind of, for me, that's like provides a sense of excitement and adrenaline that I thrive off of. I'm sure it's not for everybody, but you know, you have to be very organized. I keep a lot of spreadsheets, and I think for me that's also kind of satisfying, to have, you know, this kind of sense of like deadlines and needing to maintain a sense of organization. But these are qualities that I share with my colleagues. So I think, you know, people who work in the field enjoy that kind of sense of needing to stay organized and also having a lot going on.
It must be very fulfilling to having the sense of running on all cylinders at once, no?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's a little exhausting. I mean, I have a family too. There's a lot going on in my life all the time.
Yeah.
So certainly there are days where you just need to take a break. But most of the time it's pretty exciting.
But you use different cylinders for the family, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back to vernacular photography, why do serious collectors pay good money for it? What are they really buying? Are they buying history? Are they buying nostalgia? What is it?
I
Because
really think they're buying, I think that they're buying that sense of discovery. That's what
discovery.
discovery, and a lot of those pieces are essentially unique. And I think they're buying that as well. Discovering something that you cannot find anywhere else.
That's true. There are no multiples with
There's no
with
multiples, right?
Yeah.
And I think the image, more than history, although that's also a factor, it comes down to the image.
Yes.
The other thing I'm seeing more recently as an area of interest, it's not so much there's an interest in archives, a complete something, because I think that's also appealing from sort of a deep collecting impulse, is that this is everything. So I think it's kind of elemental in that sense.
Yes. I can understand that.
Mm.
But you have a family, so you can't be traveling a lot, right? To go after works and collections.
Yeah,
So, but you've done work with Antiques Roadshow.
I have. I am a specialist on the roadshow, which I love. And obviously I do other traveling for Swann as well. But you're right, I do have young children, so I have to balance all those interests. But the roadshow is a tremendous amount of fun, and also offers the opportunity to meet people and see a lot of material in a very short period of time. And also, my hope is always to bring photography to a new audience. That's sort of the baseline wish for most of what I do.
But dealing with the sellers on Antiques Roadshow must be different than dealing with collectors when you're at Swann's.
Yeah, well, they come for different reasons to the
Yeah.
show versus to me at Swann. I think that, the show is well known at this point. I came to the show and was already very well known. I think there's an element of wanting an experience of interacting with the show, and that's very exciting. I think people want information about what they own, which hopefully I can try to provide. When they come to me at Swann, they want something a little bit more specific. And usually they want to sell.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different motivation for sure.
And how does Swann differ from Phillips or Sotheby's or Christie's or the other auctions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think from the photographs department perspective, we are offering sales that have a much broader range of material, both from a price point perspective, which means it's very appealing for new and young collectors who might have a stricter budget, but also from a just type of photograph perspective. So, you mentioned vernacular, but also I can offer a fine art photograph in the $1,000 to $5,000 range fairly easily. And I love to do that if it seems like a piece that's, fitting into the sale or to collecting interest in an interesting way. The other thing, we're a much smaller operation, smaller staff, although we do about 40 sales a year. So we're doing a lot, but we're of a smaller staff. And I think that makes us much more accessible as specialists. We're really, our hands are kind of on the ground in a unique way. So, I think for some buyers and sellers, that's appealing. But we offer the same level of expertise and experience.
So as a smaller house, do you wear many hats? And do you help locating certain pieces, or do you assist arranging financing or facilitating any other functions for the benefit of your clients sometimes?
Yeah, we do wear a lot of hats. We do have teams that do bidding and accounting, so I'm not really doing that. But I think because we're a small staff, the specialist is the point of contact for everybody. So that puts us in a unique position to really get to know our clients, because they come back to us with questions about all of these things, even if I am not doing accounting, but I'll help facilitate that information or point a
Yeah.
client in the right direction. So we're really hands-on in that sense.
So you do collaborate with galleries, but you keep your distance from other auction houses. Am I correct? But I imagine it's your responsibility to keep track of what they're up to and the events and what's sold and at what price and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's an important part of your responsibilities at Swann.
Yes, it's important to keep an eye on what's going on, what's selling, for how much, what's being offered. And that's not, you keep track of your sort of what's happening in New York, but it's an international business. So you try to keep tabs on as much as you can. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, with the internet, there's just sales happening everywhere all the time. So it's pretty overwhelming, I think, for everybody, collectors too. But you do your best. It's important.
Are there companies or software that help you do that? Or do you have to do it the old-fashioned way?
Well, there are auction aggregator sites where you can see, especially if you have a special interest, you can kind of use those sites to keep tabs on things. I do, in some ways, I do miss being sent as many catalogs. That was a great way to just flip through and look at things. Now, I guess the app is another, different auction houses apps are good ways to keep on top of that.
It's not the same thing.
Just more screen time for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, photography boasts many exceptional women photographers, and Cindy Sherman immediately comes to mind. Perhaps it's because I just saw her retrospective at Worth. Overall, does the gender of the artist play any role in the pricing of the work or how sought after it is?
I think that there is a general understanding and awareness that women, not just women, but women, including, among others, have been marginalized in many ways by the market and by curatorial selections made in a certain period, whether that be by a gallery or a museum or whomever. And so returning and revisiting work by women from a variety of periods is important. And I think institutions and collectors are looking for ways to be more inclusive. So if I'm offered work by a female photographer whose maybe auction history is limited or, at price levels that are not typically where I'm looking to take work in, I might make exceptions for that, because I think it's important to broaden our notions of what we should be selling, what should be collected.
That's part of your mission in a way.
It is.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we're also paying attention to broader trends. So it's not a blanket acceptance of all work by women, but I think it's really important. So there are other categories where that is true. Basically, we've been looking at a long history of white men being sold at high prices, and why should that continue to be the case? And I think that's just happening across all mediums. but certainly I see it as a problem and something I want to help address if I can, as much as I can as an auction house specialist. So yeah, I think a lot about that as well. And, when I am talking to consigners, I tend to often ask if they have anything, because people don't always think of that work as being as valuable, because it hasn't been for a long time. So asking and looking is also part of what I'm doing.
So a question that's a good follow-up to this is, what's the percentage of female collectors to male collectors? Because that would make a difference.
Well, that's also an important point and a good question. I don't have a number I can give you, but certainly in my experience, there are more men collecting than women. I think that's there are lots of things we might think about as a reason for that. Earning power being one, but also just, again, just broadening what's happening, like looking for ways to get other people in the door and interested. But I work with a lot of enthusiastic female collectors. We've had some very high profile single owner sales of women collectors, over the last decade at a variety of houses. So it's there. It's just, I think that a lot of things have historically been defined by men and by white men, and we have to change that.
There are a lot of women's names on the philanthropy lists that appear on screens when you watch PBS and so on and so forth.
Sure.
A lot of women.
And there are a lot of women in the field.
And a lot of women in the field, yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about the auction houses just in New York, most of the departments are led by women in the photo, in photo departments.
Really?
But takes a long time to make change.
And how about cause-driven work versus pure art or conceptual work? Is the market favoring a particular trend or category? Is it cut and dry?
Cause-driven, you mean someone who has a point of view, can you define that?
Social causes usually.
Social cause, yeah. No, I think that's something people are talking about. This is just sort of I do think it just all comes down to the image in certain circumstances. So quality image making, that's what draws a collector. I think the reason for making the image can be important for some. And certainly if that's what's happening, that's important context for the work. But, at the end of the day, I think you want a strong image. I think that's what's ultimately sells the material.
You think the same priorities prevail in galleries as in auctions?
I think I think different galleries have different modes of operating and different points of view. And I think there are galleries that are thinking a lot about that and who are sort of forward driven. And in a lot of ways, galleries have, because they're a primary market and they can bring new work easily and market it, they have the ability to do that, which I, in some ways, I'm a little bit envious of, because they have so much latitude to really shape that discussion.
They have latitude, but they're also under pressure to distinguish themselves from the competition. Sure. They have to have something to offer. Now that's different.
True.
So sometimes you see distortions in the process.
Sure.
Where you ask yourself, why is this stuff hanging on walls in the garage?
Mm,
Uh,
sure. No, that's, yeah, that's true.
So, how much does the stock market affect volume and pricing? Did the pandemic have an effect on sales at Swann's?
Yeah, I mean, I think that broader economic conditions in the stock market is something people are thinking about. And certainly it can affect the results of a season at auction, or even a particular sale. But I think, COVID in particular was actually a good time to be selling, shockingly, not something I would have necessarily expected at the beginning of that period. But as it turned out, people were thinking about their homes, they were at home. The internet, I think all the auction houses and other businesses just really were able to respond and adjust and reformat to fit what was happening. I mean, that's what happened at Swann. Our team, within a couple months, had just reconfigured everything. And that was pretty incredible.
And how much of the work is sold sight unseen, like over the phone? Before the pandemic, I've been told many times by galleries that 80% of their sales happen over the phone, and that the buyers never see the actual work before buying it. Yeah.
I think the percentage of work that's sold unseen is extremely high. Our previews, even after a busy preview, we still sell a lot of the work to people who were not there, and rely on condition reports, on images, on our descriptions of the material. That's extremely common. I think the comfort level has gone up to a really high degree for buying that way. I mean, there are collectors who do not understand that, who cannot operate that way. Those people remain. But a lot of the mode has just completely shifted.
Yeah, but there's a trust factor involved here.
Absolutely, yes. And I think about this I've said this a couple times today, but I do, during a sale, leading up to a sale, editing a catalog, I think our clients have to trust us, which means mistakes happen, in terms of cataloging, mistakes happen. When we write condition reports, we have to really think about, how are we doing this? What information are we giving, and how are we describing the work? Because if any of these clients who we work with lose trust in this, then we've lost their business. So, it's one of the most important things to keep in mind, I think, for us, is how can we establish and maintain trust?
Yeah, interestingly enough, that factor has seeped into the mass market, like Amazon and eBay. So people buy.
Oh, I think you're frozen for me. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
We're back.
Okay. So I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. I wanted to ask you, is the size of the physical attendance a good predictor of sales? How many people attend?
Most of the time, no. Not at all.
Not.
I don't think so, no.
And is the first day the biggest day?
The first and last.
First and last.
Yeah.
But they're not buying the same thing, are they, on the first and the last day? Are they?
Not necessarily. Sometimes, yeah.
And are the top selling photographers always the same ones, or predictable, whether it's at Swann's or elsewhere? Do you always see the same names at the top of the list?
Yeah, I think there is a degree of predictability about what's going to sell and what the top, sellers are after a given sale or a given season. When you look at the top, like the all-time top selling list of photographs, it's not shocking. But I think, you always hope for a sleeper, even if it's not going to break into the top tier or
Yes,
become
yes.
it's something that will make a splash. That's kind of the exciting thing.
In the same vein, it's hard not to notice that the same images tend to reappear over and again from the same artists. Like Cartier-Bresson, there's 200 images that they're the ones that got to be offered for sale or hanging in galleries or at auctions. In a way, it's sort of regrettable because Cartier-Bresson and other photographers like him or her must have shot in excess of 500,000 shots, and we're not getting to see them. But in another way, it teaches us something about what makes it work valuable in the marketplace to some degree, because those are images that have proven champions, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, because there are these iconic images. If we're going to use Cartier-Bresson as an example, I mean, there are 4 or 5 images from him that return every season. You can find an example of some of these, but they are also extraordinarily great images. So it's,
Of course.
it's hard, you want them.
They're not numbered because they didn't number them at the time.
Sorry?
They're not editioned at the time.
Right. So yeah. And so for some of these, there are a lot of them around, but they maintain a level of interest, and there's a new collector looking for them. On the other hand, this notion of expansion and broadening the market, you want collectors to look at the material in a new way and to think beyond some of those iconic images and to understand the broad output of a photographer's work. That's hard to do in the context of an auction at times, because the sales online are out in the world for 3.5 weeks total. So it gives you a narrow window in which to say to somebody or change someone's mind. So it happens slowly, but I think I understand why those images appear. I saw them myself, but I hope that you'll find other things by those photographers at Swann too. And I hope that people will begin to spend more time considering them. I think, sorry.
In London, I don't remember which museum it was, in a glass enclosed case, I saw this gorgeous album of Henri Cartier-Bresson's nudes. I never knew that he did nudes, and I had never seen the pictures before. And it's just, and there was just only one, because it was, an album was open to a page, it was resting inside the case, and it was just stunning. But I had never, ever seen that picture. And I wonder why those pictures are not shown.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, that's a question for whoever is representing the work, and it could be just a question of like, what comes first, showing the work or creating the interest? I mean, how do you create the value for those pieces? But yeah, I mean, I think more people should be, maybe that's not, I should, be more generous, but I do think this is going to become a really, really important question for broadening the market for the work. We can't continue to sell, the same photographs over and over again for eternity. It's just not going to work. So,
But particularly at a time when images are, are in editions, limited editions of sometimes very few, 4 or 5 prints.
right. That, yeah, the mode of editioning has definitely changed.
So, considering that Swann is located in New York, do East Coast artists sell better at Swann's than West Coast artists overall?
No, I mean, I think there are photographers who have a regional appreciation, and there are works that come up at auction that will sell to a collector who's from that region because they are interested in that material. For example, I can think of work we've sold that San Francisco related that sold to collectors in San Francisco because they're actively looking for that material, understandably. So, but I think that now, especially in the age of the internet, you can save keyword searches for everything. It matters less where the work is sold. I mean, there are things that I see, I would say more so than the East-West Coast question. I see certain works so much better in Europe. And I do think the collecting habits can be different between European and American collectors. So there are things where I might say no because I don't see the audience for it in America. So I'll tell a client, you should really sell that in Europe.
Yeah, there are a number of photographers that are very highly valued in Europe that rarely, if ever, are shown in America that I know of. Ernst Haas being one of them, and a number of photographers from Magnum, for instance, and women photographers. It's interesting to notice that there's a certain regional aspect to the taste. I'm not sure why that is.
I'm
these
not
are
sure
very
either.
good photographers, yeah.
Yeah.
And has Swann ever considered expanding to other locations like overseas, maybe, or the West Coast?
I think that's not a question I can really answer. I do think that, we've seen a lot of that happening, especially recently, where auction houses are expanding or acquiring venues in other locations. I think that for me personally, because we only have a New York City location, it means if the collection is located somewhere else, I will travel to see it. I might make it, those decisions have to be made a little bit more quickly to go see a collection, to help facilitate the movement of a collection from one place to another, from its location to us. But really that question's probably for other people at Swann to answer. Yeah.
So tell me, Deborah, if you could rent a magic wand for half an hour, how would you use it?
Oh. Wow. Half an hour. So it's a time-based thing. That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can think of some practical purposes for work that is always at the bottom of my to-do list. I'd love to just see magically completed. Other
things that you would really like to happen?
Well, I would just love to have more opportunities to educate and have a platform for that. I think that's it's a big thing to take on, and it's really a little bit beyond the actual scope of my job in that broad sense. But I think that I enjoy that. I think having a really large platform could really help the market. I would love to have that opportunity. You know, I don't know if that's a magic wand situation, but it's definitely something I'd love to see. You know, I think auction houses are being asked to wear many hats in terms of bringing new material to auction, educating, selling in a variety of ways. And I think it's hard to do all of that at once. So if I could, if a magic wand would help with that, I would take it. Absolutely.
And communicating with the potential public
Yeah.
or young people.
Yeah. Young
Yeah.
people. Absolutely. I mean, we see a lot of students come to Swann, and a lot of them are extremely enthusiastic and interested, and they're photographers themselves. You know, they kind of are interested in the history and also photographers themselves. You know, what I'd really love to see is a narrowing of the division between historical photography, like 19th century, even early 20th century photography, and what's considered contemporary photography. I think for collectors and for selling venues, there's a vast separation between, not so much for the makers. I mean, the artists themselves are very aware and knowledgeable, but why this sort of division has happened, you know, when you look at contemporary records for sales of photographers, they're all in contemporary art sales. A lot of the contemporary photographers are represented by contemporary art galleries, not by photo galleries. And, you know, all of that's okay, but I think people who collect contemporary photography and vice versa should also be collecting other periods. You know, I wish if I could wave a magic wand and just like get rid of that, you know, sense of like division, I would do that in a heartbeat.
Yes. Well, you know, the priorities of an artist looking at art, whatever, from whichever period is a little bit different. You know, they're not looking at the same thing
Absolutely.
as the collector, you
Yes.
know.
But if someone who bought, say, a contemporary landscape, and liked landscapes in general, they could also buy, you know, a Carlton Watkins or a Muybridge photograph, the earliest American landscapes. There's a connection there. And I think there's a visual connection. There's a direct, you know, sometimes overt connection between the art, between the photographers. You know, why shouldn't that be something that's pushed a little bit more? Because I think it's our job to make those connections on behalf of the buyer. So that doesn't really happen.
You know, to be able to do that successfully, the collector has to also be an expert curator, because to get some kind of cohesiveness, you know, between pieces of different periods is of course doable, but you have to be really good at it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's not for every collection. I think some collectors might matter to some people more than others. It's also, you know, there are numerous professionals who can help with that. Or just, you know, honestly, for me, you know, when people ask me on the sales floor, you know, how do you start collecting? What should I buy? I just say, like, buy something you love, you know, that's the bottom line. So if you love all these things, then that might be enough in some cases. You know, I just find it unfortunate that the contemporary art market and the classical and, you know, early collecting has really become so, it's being done by completely different people.
It's segmented.
Yes. Certainly, we try to offer contemporary work. Other houses do too. It's not, you know, it's not that there isn't crossover, but when you're looking at the high value material, when you're looking at, you know, there is an essential, as you say, like division, segmentation of the market when you get to that material.
Well, it was wonderful chatting with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Really glad that we spent that much time together. It was
Yeah.
really fun and informational. And, you know, I really hope we get to do something again together on some
Likewise.
project or other.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thanks to Swann Auction Galleries for making this conversation possible. And thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And talk again.
All
soon.
right. Thank you. Sounds good. Take care.
Bye.